Welcome back to OpenLine tonight. Let me spit that out here. We are joined by Dr. Reavis Mitchell. Thank you once again for being here.
Thank you very much.
Professor and Dean at Fisk University. Our topic tonight, Black History Month. You are welcome to call in with an event of your own that you would like others to know about, or a memory that you would like to share that you feel it's important for others to remember and know about. And we've been talking about a conference coming up this Friday to celebrate the history and the culture of African Americans, not only here in Nashville, but Tennessee, and of course, across the United States.
Yes, yes.
You went through all the wonderful topics that are going to be discussed, and the art and the music. What is your overall hope for this conference? And it's in its 37th year. 37
years. We hold the conference in the main lecture hall of Tennessee State University, and generally we have about 300. The hall will hold about 550. My hope is to see the hall totally full, to the point where the fire marshal says you can't let anyone else in. Not just because it's something we plan. I think it's so reflective, though, of Nashville and Tennessee's history. It's not a history of people of color excluding themselves out. It shows the inclusivity. It shows what the American experience has been about. Dr. Landis' paper, for instance, on From the Hermitage to Fort Negley. It's been exciting research on the African American contributions within Andrew Jackson's Hermitage. At Fisk, we are really proud. We say a lot. I teach a lot about a young lady named Jenny Jackson, one of the original Fisk Jubilee singers. Her grandfather had been the body servant of Andrew Jackson. Oh, wow. And when you see that famous portrait of the singers at Fisk, she's the young lady in the center on the green. Miss Jenny Jackson's family, the white Jacksons and the black Jacksons, all supported Jenny in coming to college, and then college. And when the Jubilee Singers did their famous historic tour, the Jackson family used their connections to make sure that the singers were able to visit President Grant at the White House. Now, they had to go through the back door, but that's the reality of the time. So that sort of involvement, people living in Hermitage and Donaldson, that area where the Hermitage is located, they need to understand or appreciate the cultural diversity that was there. And then Fort Negley is so much in the news today, and people wonder why, and all of it, whether it is truly historically significant. But to have people travel, African Americans, some enslaved and some free, involved in the fighting of the Civil War, constructing a fort. The neighborhood around that's so significant because that fort represented, for those people who have built it, they stayed there for protection. And even after the Civil War, they settled in that community because they felt they were protected. So it's an important part of Southern history. And making news again today, as we were talking about the the redevelopment of Fort Negley. Anthropologists were brought in. They believe they have found graves. Yes, yes. So that's the reason it's important to sometimes understand the past, to understand how it's relevant to the present. And then the paper on material culture, Dr. Baldwin's paper on King and whether King and Trump and whatever. So we think it's a good way. The papers are presented by historians from the different college campuses, but we often have lay people, and I liked your call about asking people to call and share their stories. When we began this conference, the direction from Maydeen Eberling, who was down here at Channel 5 at that time she was the Metropolitan Historical Commission, and Dr. Bobby Lovett and Linda Wynn, who were the founders, were to get these stories out. This year, doing African American History Month, I see a lot of focus on what they call hidden stories. We've always cared about those hidden stories that are American stories. They are applicable, some of them, to the experiences of the new immigrant Americans. They're stories that are applicable to colonial settlers. So, when you talk about some of the raids and the riots and whatever, well, there were raids and riots by Native Americans many years ago because they thought their rights were being trampled on. So again, it's a recurring theme of history, but we're excited. So I'd like to see it full. I'd like to see people also recount their stories and remember their stories and plug into it. We all hopefully will have a long future, but we all have a past. We all have a history, and it's understanding that and how it works into the mosaic of American history. Tennessee is a bit unique. We don't fall into the picture of what people consider the Deep South and that history. We're what I call the Up South. We are different east, west, and middle with 3 grand divisions. So it's interesting, I think, to understand how this city emerge into what it is. People think it's really fascinating now that we have so many people coming to Nashville. Well, people have always come to Nashville.
Sure.
That's been
That's
a part of the
point.
That's a part of the history of Nashville. When the Robinsons and the Donaldsons and they came in to explore, they came in to settle. But even then, the Native American communities, several of them had occupied Nashville at different times. They traveled in to fish, to hunt. So it's a part of the sort of the geography. So it's a continuation. So I hope this conference will help people or stimulate their interest in our great city.
You bring up an excellent point, and we talked before the show. I said, as a professor, do you feel that students come into your classroom, especially African American students per se, knowing their history?
No.
And I guess I'm not surprised. I think we're all like that.
How would they know it? When African American History Month began, it was a very simple challenge. At that point in time, in the early part of the 1900s, when they produced the school books, they said nothing about the African American. Or if they said something, it was very limited. They presented as slaves or whatever. The beginning of African American History Month, Dr. Carter Woodson, a Harvard-trained African American historian, he wanted a time when we would highlight the contributions of the Negro to America. It began as Negro History Week, just 1 week. Well, who was it for? It wasn't just for black Americans or Negroes, which didn't know the history. It was also for white Americans who weren't aware. Many times if you're unaware of someone's history, you don't know that they were there. Let me give you one example. For many years, people didn't understand or know that African Americans were active participants in the American Revolution, in the Battle of Bunker Hill, in those rights, because they see simply discussion of slavery. But those free black men who participated because they were Americans, they heard the call. So Peter Salem and Salem Poor and Pomp Blackman, black men who proudly fought in the American Revolution. Only recently, when we talk about the settlement of the West after the Civil War, people get to talk about the Buffalo Soldiers, that there were African Americans who were there. Now the interest in the Tuskegee Airmen, because there wasn't the idea that African Americans had fought valiantly in wars and been that. But the participating in the American Revolution is so important, because if you fought for something, then you have a right to the benefit. So subtly it argued that African Americans fought and supported the country, so they had a right to become free and full citizens. So in that way, the positive contributions, African American History Month, Negro History Month, a week, wasn't begin to separate the African American out. It was put forth to hopefully bring that inclusion into a culture. That challenge is still faced. Textbooks may say more than they did, but it's important for people, and I think it's important for people to ask why. Why do you continue to celebrate this? It also is a time to often rehabilitate an image. Many times the only images seen of African Americans in the mass media are people involved in crime or in the whatever illegal is. Won't talk illegal industries or narcotics. Said, well, I'm not just a criminal. I've been a United States Senator in the case of Edward Brock. In the case of Barack Obama, I've been president of the United States. I've been very proud, but this can often slip into the background, and so you think people are taking this month as a time to highlight themselves out. I see it more as a time when people are saying, we're all in this together.
Right, what I hear you saying is this is our history.
That's right, this is our history.
Yeah.
You can't have United States history without African American history.
Right. Let's jump to the phone lines. We have Lucy on the line. Lucy, thank you for your call tonight.
Hey, y'all. I really hate to call in and say anything because I don't want to interrupt the professor.
Isn't it a great education? I love it.
And I tell you what, one of the things that I used to do when I would fly into Nashville, I would try to catch an archaeology meeting over there at the Science Museum up there on Port Degla Hill. Just to sit there and watch them talk about Indians and archaeology and sit there because of the significance of that fort and what it has to my family with the Civil War being here and how that pretty much put the nail in the coffin of the Civil War and stopped it. And they were starving to death, you know, by the time, you know, the end of the war was coming. Nashville really, really went through some hell. People don't realize that. And that helped shape the culture that people consider the Nashville culture, which is quickly fading. But, you know, coming up in Nashville, one of my favorites on TV was a guy that used to appear with Dr. Luby, and that was a guy named Vivian. Not too many people talk about him. I wish somebody would do a documentary or something on him. And I'm proud of the fact that Callie House had lived here. Mary Frances Berry wrote a book about her, and if anybody wants to read a good read on Nashville and see some of our underpinning, it would be Callie House and how she contributed not just to Nashville but to the country. But I just got through watching the movie Marshall, and right at the end they did a little shout out to Mr. Luby, and this is how I view the civil rights movement. I viewed it as helping poor people, black, white, whatever color, the oppressed. And to me, as far as I'm white, as far as a white person goes, it didn't just give black people civil rights. To me, it set white people freer to talk to and interact with and share ideas and sorrow stories and music or whatever with whoever they wanted. And in conclusion, what really made me dig in was the song that Stevie Wonder came out with in the early 70s, Black Man. And if nobody's heard that song, they need to spin it up. I'll get off the phone.
All right, Lucy, we always appreciate your insights. Anything ring a bell there for you?
Lucy brought up some wonderful topics.
Yeah.
The Reverend C.T. Vivian was very active. He was a minister, pastor at Fruit Street. He and his son still operate seminars on nonviolence, and nonviolent resistance is part of it. The attorney, Dr. Z. Alexander Luby, if you're familiar with Nashville, there's a Luby Center library. Dr. Luby's home was bombed the day before a very famous march. Luby had served as the attorney who represented the students involved in the civil rights protest. An idea spawned by students here in Nashville who got together and who began to ask the question, you know, if not now, when? African Americans had participated valiantly in 2 wars to make the world safe for democracy, but yet they had been come home and denied democracy. So young college students in the late 1940s and early 1950s began to come together and discuss these questions. Here in Nashville, students from Fisk, American Baptist College, Meharry Medical College, Tennessee State, under the direction of a young man named Dr. James Lawson, who was at Vanderbilt, an African-American divinity student, began to look at a program of social change through passive resistance. Changing. How does the minority have the majority respect their rights? You can't go one-on-one fighting, but you said something's morally wrong, and you stand up for it. You stand up for it. So those ideas erupted here in Nashville and saw the beginnings of morally supported segregation when Mayor Ben West stood on the front steps of the courthouse and
answered a very important question.
Yes, for a woman named Diane Nash, a young student who said, "You mean I can go in the store and spend my money, but I can't have a Coke, I can't try on a dress." And the mayor of Nashville admitted. He said, first of all, I don't own these stores. So he said, but I don't think it's right. That was the beginning out of Nashville for the greatest change in America. You know, the Civil War may have freed people, but the Civil War didn't make anyone equal.
Right.
Equality is only granted in the eyes when people grant so. And that challenge we still face. I think we really believe that. I believe, as one who's taught United States history and a historian, America's the greatest country in the world. But you have to live up to that greatness. You have to live up to it. I mean, this, you know, all the discussion about immigrants coming. Why do people want to come to the United States? Because it's a great place. No one out in San Diego, California, you see signs, little feet, say, be careful. It's because people are trying to rush in. No one ever rushes to leave the United States. No one ever leaves the United States.
All right, we're going to take another quick break. I know that we have Jarek and Janice both on the line. When we come back, we're taking your calls and more talk today about Black History Month. Stay with us. Come right back.